Dear Heavenly God, we thank you for the Sabbath day, for the time of fellowship and praise and study. As we continue our studies for the day, we just ask you for your blessing upon all that we are learning. As we continue to grow in understanding of what the Sunday law is, may these things settle into our hearts and minds. May you recall to our minds, Lord, where we are frail in memory, that we can hold all the pieces of this message together to see the beauty of it. We might be prepared to help others. We thank you and we praise you, and we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. I'm going to attempt to do this on the board. And hopefully all goes well. I do have the notes, so I'll probably be reading a lot, but I'm going to try not to get a little bit better on it. So let's fix the boards where you can see it right. Just 1 second to tip it up. So you can see okay there, I think, now?
Perfect.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. You're going to have to move. I can't. There you go. Sorry. I have to step over her. Yeah, you can see the whole board. Oh, okay. Yeah, perfect.
Is there anything written above 400 years?
Nope. Just the top of the board.
Okay, great.
Yep. Just the top of the board. Okay. So this was the end doesn't justify the means, and it follows after the what Jackie just did. You did the Covenanters, and she did, what was the title? Wrong Understanding of History. I can't remember the title.
The dangers of historical fiction.
Yeah, there you go. Okay. So this particular presentation was in between the Germany and Brazil camp meeting, the standalone one. And she points out that in the French camp meeting, she did the Eden to Second Advent line. In the one line being Eden to the Second Advent. And then God is trying to communicate his character, which we talked about just a little bit ago. That God's trying to communicate his character to his people. And we're going to see how God is limited in doing that. Okay, so with Eden to Eden, you have sin enter in. Sin enters in, and then also comes inequality. So we have sin and then inequality. We know that this happens from what she's laid out fairly fast, because Cain's not yet born and they're not thrown out of the garden. Cain's not out of the garden, and that there's little time between creation and everything going wrong. And so the world quickly descends into chaos, where the strong control and abuse, the strong control and abuse the weak, and Ellen White describes the time as abuse and slavery. And that reaches the point where God decides to end it, and that was the flood. And then new equality arises again. So you have creation, sin soon after, inequality enters, and then leading you to this new inequality that rises up, and the flood. And what we were understanding before, I put a little note in here for myself. What we were understanding down here is this political vote. So Adam and Eve were placed at this place to vote, to choose between two political ideologies. So anyway, so what we do through our reform lines is try to identify how God is trying to sort out this problem. Because we would argue, based on all the methodology, that you should know God's character greater than Abraham ever did. And we use just a simple example of slavery to give evidence, because Abraham had slaves. So we, in our time, are to know more and know that slavery is wrong. Okay, so, but most Adventists would say, traditional Adventists would say that that there's nothing that God can't do when it comes to communicating. But at that time, when Abraham is alive, there were peoples in what we would describe as Asia today. There were peoples in Africa today, groups rising in what we would describe as North and South America today, in Australia and Ireland. So knowing that that's a complicated subject, but just one thread, doesn't God want to reach everyone? And we know that he would, and yet he's restrained in this small geographical area. And is that because those people aren't worth saving? In other tests that I would argue it's because God is limited. So we know that God has limitations in how he can communicate with his people. So he has to wait for a dispensation, and we'll go through this part real quick. He waits for a dispensation where they get the written language. So you have the written language. And then next you have the roads. And then the peace, is it peace? Yeah, peace on the sea, peace on sea. So during this time, there's the ability to communicate. Then you have the printing press. What was next? What history was this one?
Reformation.
Reformation, thank you, yeah. And so what was next?
That would be art history, World Wide Web.
No, not yet. From the Reformation, where do you go next after the Reformation?
Industrial,
Where?
industrial civilization, like the road, steamboats and trains.
I heard a few with some feedback. Try again. So you got the Reformation. What history is next?
Miller,
Millerite. Okay, and what did they have?
steamboats, telegraphs, trains.
There you go. The rails, you get them all. The steamships, steamboats as well, and the telegraph came as well. Okay, then what history came next?
Then it would be ours,
That would
World
be
Wide Web.
World Wide Web. Okay, so God is limited in how he can communicate, and what's he trying to communicate?
The message of the time.
More specific, he's trying to communicate what to us? What did we talk about earlier about the Old Testament?
His character.
Character. He's trying to communicate his character, and he needs a people to do it through to reach the world. Because people have a wrong idea of God's character. And what was their idea of his character in that history? Anybody? They had a wrong idea of his character. What was it? What do we refer to it as?
Apis bull.
Apis bull. Okay. So since this history, this thread alone shows us that God is limited, but the power of our current dispensation evidenced through what we're doing right now, where except for tyrannical governments, there doesn't need to be dark spots where the message can't reach. So in our history, there may be certain tyrannical nations, but there's no dark spots where God can't reach. So you have the World Wide Web to take the message to the world. Okay. And so then the next question we ask is, she talks about God being limited in communication, but also limited by the failings of God's people. What does it mean to be stiff-necked?
Like you're unwilling to be corrected?
Yes.
Or
Stubborn.
What was that? Stubborn?
Stubborn.
She actually used a pen, so we'll kind of do that to where you have a pen and you're going to look at it, but you're only going to look at it one way because you're stiff necked and you can't turn your neck to look another way, right? So I used this because I was thinking about this as I was going through these notes, and I thought I'd ask the questions for us to fill it in. Make sure you can't cheat and see on my cheat notes. So if anybody remembers this, Elder Parmenter did it a long time ago in a presentation, and how we learn to look at scriptures and how we look at spirit prophecy, and how we look at things as a parable, and learning to look at things differently. Can you fill in what these ways were that he gave?
Juxtaposition,
Yes.
spiritual to natural,
Uh-huh.
and chiasm is one of them.
Chiasm, yeah. That's not on my list, but yes.
Repeat and enlarge.
Two more.
Compare and contrast.
Yep. One more.
What is it, line, the line upon line?
No. That's part of it, but that's not this one. Think of the woes. Or the world wars.
Triple application.
Triple application, yeah. So we learn to look at the scriptures and the spirit of prophecy in a different way, looking at things through parables and learning to look from all different ways. So the same thing with God's people being stiff-necked, we have to learn to look at things in different ways, looking from a different perspective. So if we can't look from another perspective, we're unwilling or unable, we're going to be unable to change and to learn anything. So if God is dealing with a stiff-necked people who stubbornly want to conserve their one view, even after God says that view is not fit for purpose, God has to lead slowly. So God leads people slowly, otherwise what would happen? If he led us too quickly, would we understand the message?
We wouldn't understand.
And then what might happen?
And we would just
Leave.
abandon and leave.
Slowly.
Leave.
We could possibly fail and God would destroy us. Not destroy us in the Apis bull concept, but it would destroy us, if that makes sense. The message itself would destroy us. So he leads us slowly, taking us out of that darkness and letting the light out slowly to prepare us. So going back to a couple of examples, polygamy was not a good idea 4,000 years ago. It's not a good idea for David, and God tolerated things. So as he's leading people through, God tolerated things, and he tolerated David and polygamy. He tolerated meat eating. He didn't like it, but he tolerated it. Same with slavery. He didn't like it, but he tolerated it because he's stuck and he needs to find a way to communicate his character to his people. So, but he leads through two particular movements. And what are those two particular movements that he leads through?
Millerites.
Okay, what would you refer to that as?
That would
Alpha.
be alpha.
Alpha modern.
Alpha. Yeah.
Modern. Who said modern? Modern was the one I was looking for. But yeah, so you have modern. So he leads through these two different movements, ancient Israel and then modern Israel. So he's going to work through humanity. He needs to have a people to communicate with that would be a light to the world. I was thinking about that too, as the sun reflects, the moon reflects the light of the sun, right? So he needs to find a people to work through that could reflect his character, that he could teach his character and reflect his character. He needs to have people to communicate with and be the light of the world. So there's ancient Israel, and at the end of the time prophecy, at the end of the 400 years, you have the time prophecy. They come out of darkness. They have to reinstitute the Sabbath. You have the Sabbath reinstituted. And he makes one call to the church and one call to the world. And that's ancient Israel. They are stiff-necked and they hold on to paganism. So they don't, we know they let go of the idol worship. They hold on to paganism. So they go through the trial and captivity of Babylon. Babylon, this is Egypt. That would be Rome. So they go through the trial and captivity in Babylon. They let go of any acceptance of idol worship. In this history, they let go of idol worship. So you have Egypt and Babylon. At the end of the history of that movement, this history here, this would be the Alpha and that would be the Omega. So at the end of the Omega history, the period of captivity to Rome, God gives them an increase of knowledge, but the people can't see it because they're stiff-necked and they can't learn anything new. So that was ancient Israel. There's in the Alpha history, there's one called to the church, one called the world. There's the reinstitution of the Sabbath. They were in darkness, come out of darkness after that prophecy, and God is preparing to bring them out of bondage. Then they have the Babylonian history, where they still they are cured in this history after their captivity of any idol worship whatsoever. Then in this Omega history, there is an increase of knowledge here, but they're also unable to recognize the nature of the king, the nature of the kingdom. So we know that modern Israel follows the same pattern. Put up here, no idols. Modern Israel follows the same pattern, and this is what's been being studied from May 2020 until this current time. And there's also one call to the church, one call to the world, right? And you have 1798, the 1260 years in, 1798, the end of the time prophecy. The Sabbath is reinstituted as well here. And then in the 1888 history here, the 1888 history, the importance of the Sabbath is driven home. So up here it was idols, and down here it's the Sabbath that is driven home. And around the time of Babylon, no one would dare construct an idol, so no one would dare keep Sunday here. They knew that their idol worship was a direct opposite of worshiping Jehovah, so they abandoned the form, and it would no longer be considered. You wouldn't even think about constructing an idol in Jerusalem, in this history here. In 1888, they're cured of any attempt to worship on Sunday. As an Adventist, you would not even consider that. Idol worship is the opposite of anything considered Jewish, and Sunday worship is considered the opposite of anything Adventist. We were cured in this history. So we would not keep Sunday. So we're in the Omega history here. So this would be the Alpha, and this would be the Omega. We're in the Omega history, and the issues they faced at the end of ancient Israel up in here are identified at the end of modern Israel. So you could lay these two movements side by side. So if you would take this and put it up here, what's that called? If this were up here.
Line of progression.
Line of progression, right. So you would have a line of progression if you did it that way. And that God has been attempting. We see that through this, because you could place those histories on this line as well. So it would be a line of progression. But what we have done is we've compared and contrasted. So we took and cut that line and brought this history down here to compare and contrast the two histories. Compare and contrast this over here. So we can use ancient Israel to teach us of modern Israel. And to do that, you have to both compare and contrast the two movements. So you would compare and contrast the this Alpha and Omega history, this middle history. You have the Alpha and the Omega in the middle history. We see that both come out of darkness. After the end of the time prophecy, you have a time of the end. There's in the Alpha history, you have the one call to the church, the one call to the world, and same down here. You have a restoration of the Sabbath, restoration of the Sabbath. They're cured of their idol worship and they're cured of their Sunday keeping. And now you're in this history here that we're looking at. So the majority of what ancient Israel had to learn in this history here would be just in this short period of time. They had to learn was particularly radical to their Jewish way of thinking, was all taught to them in the first part of that history, in the history of the disciples under John and Christ. So this would be the history of the disciples here under John and Christ. And Paul does have an increase of knowledge. There is information, but everything, all the radically new teachings are here. The radical teachings are all here in the first 30 to 31 years of that history. And it's the same here for us. And who are we? These are the disciples. Who are we?
144,000.
Yeah, but on this, 144,000, but what else are we considered?
Priest,
The priest, yeah. So the priest. But that was correct too. So how can God prepare a group of people to take a message to the world if there's fundamental things that they do not understand? So how can you prepare them to go to the world, either one, when there's things that they do not understand? And I can attest to that myself because people that I've tried to share with and not understanding the message that God was preparing to open up. So they're taught here in the beginning, and then they go and share. And this is where they straighten out all their doctrine and preparation before they go and share that doctrine. So this work is also ours, the line of the disciples or the priests, the line that should be us. So we can see this line a couple of different ways, comparing and contrasting with ancient Israel, or as the end result of 6,000 years, which is the line of progression of effort, where we're talking over a platform that is connecting people from multiple continents all over the world, and we discuss the preparation that must be made for Eden, 6,000 years of progression. So you can look at it this way, compare and contrast, where you can look at it as one line of progression and see us down here now using this platform, Zoom, to be able to learn the correct doctrine, prepare to go and talk to the world. So the radical education for the first group occurs in 4 dispensations, and that's this line here, in the 4 dispensations. And you have the plowing, former rain, latter rain, and harvest, right? So the fundamental concepts of our methodology are given in here. You have line upon line given, you have time given in these first two dispensations. Time is given, and it's our final 2 dispensations, these 2 here, that we're going to look at. And somebody wants to give me the dates. I think we all know them by now, but let's test you out. Should I call a name? Jackie. Gloria. Go ahead, I think Gloria.
1991.
What? Say that again. What's the time of the end?
1989.
1989. Sorry.
Okay. Okay.
2001,
2001,
2014, 2019, and 2021.
2021. Okay. So those last 2 dispensations. So our methodology of line upon line has become more and more precise. So when we come down to this history down here, we're now able to identify that there are 4 dispensations, 1, 2, 3, 4, for the hand of God, 5 waymarks in 4 dispensations: plowing, former rain, latter rain, harvest. Where do we get that structure from?
Agricultural model.
Say that again.
Agricultural model.
Yes, yes. And I was also thinking the actual,
Hand of God. Where's that?
Yeah, I was thinking about what Ellen White gives us, where she gives us 1798, says it's the time of the end. We know that 1840. If I say that right, I get the two mixed up when we're looking at the 144,000. It's 1840, right? And then you have Sunday law, close of probation, and second advent. So we get that hand of God from that initial reform line. Did that make sense? Unless I got the 40 and 44 in the wrong line. Somebody help me if I'm wrong there.
I think it's 1844.
Yeah, I think it is too. Which depends on which one you're looking at, but the one I was asking about, I'm pretty sure you're right, is 1844. Does everybody follow that, or do you need me to go through that again?
Well, 1844, that's the great controversy line, right?
That's the one I'm looking at. Yeah, thank you. So 1844, right? So you
I
have,
believe so, yeah.
go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay, so you have 5 waymarks, right? And 4 dispensations. And then, as I think it was Logina that said, the agricultural model gives us these dispensations and what goes on. Okay, so we're able to identify that there's 4 dispensations, and we'll be able to place in that structure, developing structure, an increase of knowledge and a formalization. So you're able to then put this increase of knowledge and the formalization into that. And more recently, we're able to see the nature of a waymark, how waymarks work and how fractals work. So fractals are, when I was referring to the great controversy line, that gives us that structure. And then this is a fractal of that line. So, and more recently, we're able to see the nature, how waymarks work and fractals work. Our whole methodology has become very precise and very refined. So if we look at how much history went through to here and how much we knew compared to what starts to explode here, but it's still the same message all the way along. Okay, let's see here. So we need to see this in 2 different ways. Repeating pattern. This is the repeating pattern, right? Repeating pattern. Boston, Concord, Exeter. You have Boston, Concord, Exeter, and then a test. You have an arrival of a message, an increase of knowledge, and a formalization, and then a test. Boston, Concord, and Exeter, and you have that in each dispensation. But at the same time, we have that repeating pattern. There's certain waymarks that still have special characteristics. So going to the 144,000 line that we discussed, where we discussed fractals, the Sunday law. You have Sunday law is Daniel, what?
1141.
1141. So you have Daniel 1141. What we understood is with the line of the 144,000, but through fractals, you can see through the fractals, because we understand this to be the Sunday law, right? But through fractals, we can see Sunday laws before. And what are these dates? So this is the Sunday law, but through fractals, we see 3 other Sunday laws that are shadows of this. What are these dates?
2014, 2019, and 2021.
2021. Okay. So all of which could be described as a shadow of the Sunday law, all of which show us the development of that process. So these are shadows of the Sunday law showing us the development leading up to this Sunday law.
So the 2014 is the Sunday law for the priest, and then the Levites and the Nethinims, right? The
Right.
2021.
And then this for the 144,000 of the world, however you put that. Well, because the Nethinims is the world. So this is the Sunday law, the Sunday law here for the world, from the line of the 144,000. Okay, so you can see the repeating pattern, but let's see. So all of which could be discussed as a shadow, which shows the development of that process. But there's only one Sunday law on our reform line. There's only one Daniel 1141. So on the 144,000 line, there's only one Sunday law. It's only through fractals that you see these shadows. There's only one Daniel 11:41. So you can see the repeating pattern, but it works as the fulfillment of that verse, and the structure gives us the shadows or the development of that verse. So when we come to our latter rain here as priests, and we see the midnight cry, which is here, right? We see the midnight cry. There's only one midnight cry at the end of ancient Israel. There's only one midnight cry here. And there's only one midnight cry that lines up with the Exeter camp meeting. You got the Millerite history. So this is 1996. Though it's a formalization, it's not a midnight cry. This is 2012. And though it's a formalization, it's not the midnight cry. You have 2021. What is 2021 on the line of the 144,000?
Formalization.
Formalization. So though it's a formalization, there's still only one midnight cry. Did that make sense?
Yes,
Okay. So this is actually a formalization in this dispensation. This is a formalization on the 144,000 line. 2021 is. So though you may have a formalization here and a formalization here, there's only one midnight cry. And this is a formalization on the 144,000 line, but it's still only one midnight cry. And it becomes important to understand because Ellen White was standing here. Ellen White is standing here and she's looking back and says that the light of the midnight cry lit the path all the way to the second advent. So this midnight cry, because there's only one, is going to light the path all the way to the second advent. We don't have that on this line. This is just the priest line. So it would light the way all the way to the second advent. Someone asked, what if I can't remember? I think some of us have been there. What if I can't remember all of the material of the midnight cry? And she doesn't want to take away the responsibility that they had to go back and study it because we have to know it. But a core principle of the midnight cry. What is the core principle of the midnight cry?
sexism,
No.
Two streams of information.
Two streams of information. Two streams of information. And we're gonna go to the next one. So the core principle is two streams of information that told us what is good and what is bad. It told us social conservatism is bad and social liberalism is good. Hitler is bad, Churchill is good. Conservative Protestantism. The danger, which was the power that gave rise to Trump and to Bolsonaro, to right-wing leaders all over the world. So this dangerous stream that gave power to Trump and other right-wing leaders. So when we're over here and studying the history of the Covenanters, here we are in this history right here, and we're studying the Covenanters, which Christine reviewed on Friday night, and Jackie followed it up this morning. So we're here studying the Covenanters. We're still actually walking in the light and studying the midnight cry message. We've not changed subjects from that message. We're studying and understanding better the midnight cry. When you read that document that discusses the three histories, that's what we've been reviewing as well, how the Constitution became Christian, Jared A. Goldstein. You read that of the three histories of Protestant movements, you're studying the midnight cry. And that message, that light is not left behind. We're actually still in it. So this light is lighting all the way through and all the things that we've been studying. So we continue to study that message and grow in it. So if you're small and you're studying math and you learn that 2 + 2 = 4, and then you're going to get a little older and you're going to go on into things like calculus, you're still studying math. You're still studying the same subject. You're studying math. But you took some lessons along the way, and you took a test, you took some lessons and you took a test, and you took some lessons and you took a test. But you're still studying the midnight cry message. And it's not something that we leave behind us and move on from. And studying that document is just a key example of that. So I want to discuss some comparisons and some differences between our last dispensation and in our current one. And this particular presentation was done in 2021. So she's talking about this one being the last one and this one being the current one that we're in. And we know that we're out here now. So 2014 to 2019 was easy. And it was simple. And then 2019 to 2021 was hard. And she's going to explain why. So if you want to carve a statue out of wood, you might start with a big tree trunk. And how are you going to start? Some of you guys that might have done woodwork, you're starting, even if you're doing ice, if you're got a block of ice, how are you going to start?
Foundation.
You mean like generally to specific?
Yeah. You want to eventually have a design that you have in mind, but how do you begin that work?
You want to make a plan?
Yeah, but say you have this big block of ice. Ice probably might be easier to say than a tree trunk, either one. But you have this big block of ice. And you're only going to need that one portion down to the design, but you've got all this around it. How are you going to begin?
Cut out the fat, cut out the excess?
Yeah, you're going to take, if it's wood, you're going to take a chainsaw maybe and take out some big chunks out of it, right? Some hard, brutal blows, cutting away the majority of what should not be there, the big features. So that's this history here. Cut out some of that big stuff that doesn't need to be there. And I venture to say it for myself anyways, that we weren't real observant, myself. I wasn't real observant of what it was cutting away, really, so much until we got here. We just saw the results of it more. I saw the results of it more here. As it was happening here, I see the results of it more here. So anyway, so you would take out big chunks of it first. So that was the previous dispensation, and God made hard cutting blows here, hard cutting blows. So it was easy. It was good versus evil. It was Churchill versus Hitler. So you have this good versus evil in this history. You have Churchill. Hope I did that right. And you have Hitler. And then you have the North versus the South. And people in the movement said that we don't agree with that. We don't believe that. They reject equality and they left this movement. So there's people that in the movement that didn't agree with this and left the movement. So we come into this new dispensation here. And what starts happening to our message?
It's more refined.
It's more refined. So the previous was easy. So as it's getting refined, what is it over here then?
Complex.
Complex and harder. So the first message we start to cover, let's see. And what's the first message we start to cover in this dispensation? I kind of hear somebody every now and then, but I don't hear you because it's quiet and I don't know if it's your sound.
It's the Apis bull.
Not quite to the Apis bull, but early 2020. She covered, and we actually went through it already.
In God We Trust.
Not quite that one. She went through Biden. Does anybody remember the study on Biden?
Compromise?
Compromise. So early 2020, the first subject was compromise. And to do that, we covered the end of ancient Israel, the wilderness time. And that was where she had, if I remember right, where she had, this is 2019, and you had Gethsemane, and then you have the wilderness. And she went through that history and also in Portugal. So you had the end of ancient Israel, and then you had the wilderness. And then what we what did we study at the end of the school in Portugal? It was like a prelim to our increase of knowledge. We started to attack someone and destroyed his reputation. So you're looking at it easy in the first, then in this dispensation, it starts to get hard. You're looking at understanding first compromise, and then when you started to understand compromise, who else did we attack?
Lincoln.
Lincoln. So, so we start to attack Lincoln in this area, and people start to have more problems. Okay, so now we're starting to get into difficult territory, and I think people in this dispensation are much more confused about what our message is. People are confused and disoriented, just as I say that I was. I'm glad to still be here. Let's just put it that way. I'm glad I held on to continue to understand more clearly, because I know when these things were being taught, they were like pieces all over the place, and they weren't clear in my head to bring them all together. So I'm very thankful to have stayed to have them more come together. So people are confused and disoriented, just as you would be when you move into a much harder math class. So if you went into that hard math class without the preliminary steps, you're going to have a hard time. So many of us united excitedly in the previous dispensation here, because it was so clear, cut, and simple. In our own history, I see many people struggling. I would suggest a major reason that they feel unnerved, uncomfortable, is because they don't realize there has been this transition in our message, where we're no longer talking about Churchill versus Hitler, or the North versus the South, or the true versus the counterfeit, or Trump versus Clinton. That's a simple message for the previous dispensation. And people are struggling to make the transition to the harder test, the wilderness time, and Abraham Lincoln in this area here. So you have, in this history here, you have compromise, and you have Lincoln. And it starts to get a little bit harder. So then we touched on Millerite history, no longer arguing about North versus South, or who was good and who was bad. Now it's all about Henry Clay and the Whig Party. It's not a subject of good versus evil. Then we revisited these conservative Protestants, and who did we end up attacking? Back in here, we're just going after Jerry Falwell and saying evil. I would say that would be actually in here, probably Falwell Jr. Good versus evil. And who do we end up attacking when we discuss conservative Protestantism? Who's the next one that we, in the Millerite history, in the Whig Party here?
McClay.
No. We just went through some of it with Jackie's study. Henry Clay was back with the compromise as well, in the compromise. So who else in Protestant is Protestants? Who?
Presbyterians.
Yeah, look, a couple of names. Reformation.
Oh, Knox and who's the other one?
Calvin.
Calvin. Yep.
Calvin and Knox.
Just to clarify, so Lincoln is considered evil because he was for abolition, but yet he was a slave owner.
Lincoln is seen as a good guy because he abolished slavery, right? But wasn't he still a racist?
Yes, he was.
Okay.
He wasn't
Yeah.
looking to bring everybody together. And yeah, and that's what she read in Portugal, is a lot of the quotes of Lincoln, that he had no desire to elevate the blacks with the whites, that there should be no mixing. He freed the slaves to end the war. Not because he believed they should be free. So, but people look at him, and Adventists look at him as having been the president that abolished slavery. So it was easy to see in this history, Churchill good, Hitler bad, North is good, South is bad. You have the true is good, the counterfeit is bad. But this history, you start to see compromise, the subject of compromise is introduced. And then you start picking apart at Lincoln, which touches people that don't want to look at the pen in a different way and just want to keep Lincoln in this good column over here because he abolished slavery. But Lincoln wasn't about equality. And we had to see that he wasn't about equality. So you had the Millerite history and the Whig Party. And then also, so we're picking apart the Millerite history and showing the mistakes and wrong of the Millerite history, showing the Whig Party for who they are. We're also picking apart at the Protestant Reformation as well, the heroes of the Protestant Reformation, which if you think about yourself as a Seventh-day Adventist, put yourself in the place of some of your Seventh-day Adventist friends that see all this. Now, we've had this history and a lot of it here to prepare us for this, to accept or not. And as she said, this was easy, but even though this was easy, you had FFA leave, right? And now you have this history where it's now hard, but imagine being a Seventh-day Adventist. Trying to think how to say it. So God is taking us out on a limb. Does that make sense?
So were the Millerites for the Whigs party if they had voted at that time?
I don't know if somebody have that answer. They weren't voting. They weren't involved in voting.
No.
They didn't believe that there was any reason to vote because Jesus was coming. So
So
the
Whigs were the North, right?
Whigs were the North, yeah,
And they were for abolition of slavery.
yes,
Okay, thank you.
yeah. And in the Millerite history, they just believed that Jesus was coming and politics wasn't, you didn't need to know what was going on externally. But as we were been talking, external is everything. The political is everything. So we're criticizing all of these things. We're criticizing compromise. Compromise can sound good, but we're criticizing compromise. God wasn't at a place where compromise was acceptable. History was not at a place where compromise is acceptable. Okay, so we got John Calvin and Knox were the heroes. These are original Protestant reformers. So here in Good versus Evil, we would have approached the Protestant Reformation and seen Protestant reformers as good. We would have put them over here on the good side here. And the papacy would be the evil. But when we approach it here, God doesn't let us do that. We should be well past what is a simple understanding. And it's in failing to make the transition. So these ones that are in this good side are now winding up over here as bad. Those that failed to make that transition, and I would suggest many people are struggling where they feel our message is not as clear as it used to be 2 years ago. It's not as simple. If you graduated, the class got harder. And that's one way we can see this dispensation. So she's referring next to an article that was in the media broadcast. I did get the date and I didn't get the title of the article, but I can give you if you want to look it up. It was January 22nd, 2021 in the media broadcast. And it was a foreign policy article. You'll be able to find it because I think it was at the top of the list of January 22nd, 2021. Might have been the only article that day, but it was on hypocrisy, democracy, and the US Capitol riot. And there's one demonstration of this, and I would suggest it's carefully considered. It also has implications for how we view our internal duty. I may not agree with everything that the author says or believes privately or shares in other articles he writes. But that's the case for practically every author that she shares. So the point that he is making in this article is that many on the left are looking at the riots in the US Capitol and saying America had this coming. So the left is looking at the January 6th, the attack on the Capitol, and saying America had this coming. They keep intervening in foreign conflicts, messing around in other countries, in other governments, in their governments. And now finally, they get to know what it feels like. And the author's argument is that it's too simple. It's similar to what we said in our previous dispensation here. The United States it's a hypocrisy. The Gulf War is a bad idea. So you've got all this going on. The Gulf War was a bad idea. The Iraq War is a bad idea. Afghanistan effort to destroy the Taliban was a bad idea. Overthrowing democracy in Iran was a bad idea. So back in this history, it's nice and simple. America is a global bully interfering in other countries. So she's referring to this article. That America is a global bully interfering in other countries' politics to promote their own position as a global leading power. So the left is looking at January 6th and saying because of all that, because of the behavior of the United States deserves this. They had it coming. So their position on the world stage does not become threatened. And a simple message, go home, take care of your own democracy and stop interfering. And this author is saying that that's a simplistic argument. So there's more to it than that. I won't go through all the points as he develops his case, but he's able to use a number of examples where he shows that nationalism and racism are more complex subjects. And they're so pervasive that those exact same nationalistic principles can be and have been used to end or prevent American intervention. And the example that he gave was Donald Trump when for years the Kurds had supported them in Syria. So the Kurds supported the US in Syria. And that to please his Turkish allies, Trump, to please his Turkish ally, he withdraws American troops and he leaves the Kurds vulnerable and says there's a lot of sand that they can play with. In other words, these people have been fighting over sand for hundreds of years. So he just pulls out and leaves the Kurds vulnerable. The implication, they're naturally violent. They're all troublemakers. Anyway, let's take care of our own nation and let's build walls, bring our troops home, let whatever dictator force wants to commit genocide, go ahead. Let whatever foreign economy crumble under our sanctions and our protectionist trade policies. Take care of America and forget the needs in the rest of the world. So Donald Trump used the same racism and nationalism to argue that America should not intervene in other countries' politics. The core issue is more subtle. It's too simple to say good versus evil. You can't just say that the US is evil for all its intervention. Does that make sense? Are you following this?
Yes,
Okay, so you can't just say that the US is evil because of all its foreign intervention. That like the US mind its own business or the US intervention. So either mind your own business or intervention, because I would argue that the Kurds should be protected, that international genocide should not go unchallenged. Therefore, there are cases where countries intervene in another country's politics. And I won't go further into that article, but he makes multiple relevant and good points. So that was January 22nd, 2021, a foreign policy article that's in the media broadcast. So one point is just the issue with their mindset, their belief in this US exceptionalism. They have this messianic faith in their own ability that they can spread democracy. But because they're somehow better than the rest of the world, they have not seen their democracy as being as fragile as it is. So what he says the answer is not for the United States to necessarily stop intervening, but it joins a global fight for democracy with both conviction and humility. So if you were looking at, like with this article, looking at the USA, intervening is bad, or intervening is good. So when you come into this history, she's just comparing that from going from this easy to the complex here. So even when it comes to foreign policy decisions that America has made, the position that this movement takes based on prophecy is not so simple as to say American intervention bad. Complete freedom in other countries, good. So it's not as simple as to say that American intervention is bad and complete freedom, let them do what they want, is good. Complete freedom of other governments to abuse their population without consequences. We start to get in danger when we slip back into simplistic models like good versus evil. There's nothing wrong with these models. There is no model where we're going to start softening our message on Hitler in comparison to Churchill. But seeing the complexity of these issues directly impacts how we see the complexity of running this movement. So their complete freedom of governments to abuse their population, they wanted freedom. I was thinking of our other studies today. They wanted freedom to discriminate, freedom to destroy, freedom to leave those countries to do what they want. So seeing the complexity of these issues directly impacts how we see the complexity of running this movement. So here in this dispensation here, there was a board member of a ministry that he said he loved the message of equality. And now we don't need organization. We don't need an organizational system in this movement. There's no need for government intervention. There's no need for movement intervention. Everyone was free to practice equality. We get equality, we're free to practice equality. What is that? If you say it that way, we're free to practice equality.
Libertarianism?
Huh?
Is it libertarianism?
Yeah, and we don't need government intervention, or we don't need movement intervention. Everyone was free to practice equality. Therefore, you needed no structure. In other words, no one need intervene in another person's business, because that is what organization is all about. No one need intervene in another ministry's operations. That ministry should have freedom to decide their own structure, their own way of operating. And people have become increasingly confused in this US history. Oh, she got it. Thank you. And people have become increasingly confused in this history here, as they find that Elder Parmenter and myself have not given them that freedom. It seems in conflict with the simple message of the last dispensation. So people just want to have the freedom to practice equality without any movement intervention. So there's two parables that were given here to explain our current experience. And the first was the disciples. So we have two parables. The first was the disciples. And did the people in this history get equality? Did they understand? Did the disciples understand equality?
No.
No. So our increase of knowledge, the increase of knowledge, why is it the story of the golden calf? Why did God choose that story? The story of the Apis bull as our increase of knowledge.
to start teaching us about the right character of God, the wrong character that we held on to?
Yes, and we'll go into a little more detail to that, yes. So the story of the Apis bull tells us that the reason the Jewish nation failed is because they blended their history. So they blended their history, pagan and Jehovah. So they did not understand equality. They didn't understand the nature of the king of the kingdom. And they were still worshiping in spirit the Apis bull. So they blended paganism and Jehovah. And so back in here, God says, this is what I am. And what they do is they take their favorite pieces from paganism and they take what they've learned about Jehovah and they blend the two. It's paganism plus God, and they're never able to shake that understanding. So what Adventism did is they blended Protestantism, the very Protestant Covenanters that they fought against in 1888. So Adventism blended Protestantism.
with Jehovah.
Okay.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
back in ancient Israel, they would never consider building an idol.
Pagan
Here,
plus
there's
Jehovah.
Yet when they look at Christ, they reject him because they're still worshiping the character of that idol. They let go of the form, they professed acceptance in the message, and held on to the characteristics of the spirit of that idol. They would never consider the form, but they are worshiping the form through their love of the spirit. Adventism today would never consider, we saw that up here, they would never consider keeping Sunday. Adventism today would never consider keeping Sunday, meeting in a church on Sunday and moving from one day to the next. And yet they worship Sunday because they still worship the spirit of Protestantism. So they have a blending of Protestantism and Jehovah.
And Jehovah. Wow.
So they blended the two and they still have the spirit of Sunday.
Wow.
And then by doing so, they give homage to the Covenanters' beliefs. Homage to the Covenanters' beliefs. And those beliefs in our dispensation, when it's all about marriage, that homage exhibits itself. So our dispensation here is all about marriage. That homage exhibits itself in nationalism, sexism, and homophobia. So you're giving homage to Protestantism through nationalism, sexism, and homophobia. So the structure is Sunday, or like here you have the form was the golden calf. The structure is Sunday, but the spirit is nationalism, sexism, and homophobia. We abandoned the form, but we kept the spirit.
Wow. Wow. That is awesome. I had my mic on. Sorry.
That's okay.
Talking here. I'm just seeing this is quite something. No wonder Adventists will never see it.
I know, huh? And especially
Yeah.
look at the things that we've torn apart, that they would see compromise as good. They see Lincoln as good. The Millerite history is good. The Whig Party is good. Calvin and Knox is good. You know, and then this was back here. This was, you know, then we get just prior to the end here. Yeah, just prior to the end of 2021, you see that we'll be marrying gay people. So it continues to go further out on a limb to what they would have to accept. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense.
What they would have to accept.
That would be we're off the deep end. They would see that as just crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. So God gives us two messages. First of all, you're the disciples. Second of all, you're still worshiping the Spirit. So like the disciples, you're still worshiping the Spirit. We're here in priest and we're still worshiping the Spirit. And he gives us these messages to take us away from that. When we discuss these more complex subjects, where did they go wrong? You take the Whig Party, take Abraham Lincoln's racist statements. In 1858, what does he do wrong? There's an end result, which would mean his victory. Move my chair. I don't know if that's, you guys can see, but I'm pull this away here. So for Abraham Lincoln in 1858, there is an election. It's a election not for the president, but for in the Senate. He wants success, and he knows the means to that success is Southern votes. So you have the, you guys can see over here, right? So you have the means, and you have the end result. And he knows that he needs Southern votes. In order to have success. So this is Lincoln, and he needs Southern votes in order to have success. And then she asked the question, have you ever heard the phrase, the end justifies the means? So Henry Clay, he wants to avoid civil war. He wants unity. So you have what did Henry Clay do?
Compromise.
Compromise.
In particular, which one? Because there was three that he did, huh?
1850 compromise.
1850 compromise. So you have the 1850 compromise, and he wants, because he wants unity, right? He wants peace in the camp. If he doesn't have peace in the camp, God's people could descend into violence. The whole movement could crumble. For the sake of peace, do what the people ask you to do. Shouldn't he be an elected leader? Shouldn't they be a democracy, voice of the people? So he makes the bull. Why did they end up choosing Polk as a candidate in 1844? Why did they choose Polk in 1844? Anybody remember?
He was for the South, right?
Polk, yeah. Did I say that right? Yeah,
He wouldn't have gotten that many votes.
wouldn't have gotten that many votes. So if they hadn't chosen Polk, they wouldn't have gotten even as many votes as they did. So they wanted to win the election. So their fears are real. If they wanted to win the 1860 election, Abraham Lincoln had to be their candidate. So jumping up to 1860, Abraham Lincoln had to be their candidate. Somebody who knew that he needed Southern votes in order to have success. You want to win the election, endorse Lincoln, not an abolitionist. And she asked, doesn't that make sense? If the US had not chosen Biden as a Democratic candidate and they chose Bernie Sanders instead, we would have Trump for a second term. Even with Biden, Trump still got 74 million votes. So the end result is success, stop slavery extending over the entirety of the United States. So make careful strategic decisions, endorse smaller, moderate steps. Don't go and intervene in the affairs of the Southern states. Support the freedom of the people in the Southern states to choose their own future. So support the South to have the freedom to make their own choices. Endorse Biden, prevent Trump from having a second term, strategic steps. If you think about it, it's all reasonable, even right. And yet prophecy continually shines a light on it as being wickedness. saying this is what the movement needs to see is wrong. This is what is wrong externally. So what's wrong internally? People want peace in the camp internally as well. They want to do what they want to do. It's been all too easy in this movement to want to preserve peace because no one wants a civil war. No one wants to deal with angry ministries or leaders who feel their rights are being trampled upon. But Parminder and I are engaging in foreign intervention when we go to another country and say you're not allowed to practice the dowry system. For a while in this movement, I've seen that a true fight for equality will bring about civil war in this movement. And it's easy to have peace, success, unity, more people to not engage in that fight. I would suggest to make such an argument that the end, which is peace, justifies the means, which is compromise. We're no longer permitted to make that choice. So the end, which is peace, justifies the means, which is compromise. So you make a compromise, let them practice their equality with no movement intervention, and we'll all have peace. And that we're no longer permitted to make that choice. God chose the story of the Apis bull as being precisely what we needed to understand in this history. And it's heading towards the formalization of the message. The formalization of the message is always a fight. So in this history, she's talking about this formalization here being a fight within the movement, not this formalization that's on the 144,000 line. We're dealing with ministries in this movement on an organizational level, and almost every one of those organizational issues are not about paperwork or respecting structure. It's hand-to-hand combat with organizational issues, with organizational issues are not about paperwork or respecting structure. It's hand-to-hand combat with nationalism and sexism. Sorry. So it's hand-to-hand combat with nationalism and sexism. So the next thing she covers is I think I'm gonna have to erase here. And we'll just do this last part. She's talking about a ministry. Must have been a real example online, I'm assuming. A ministry here, okay, decides that they want to run a camp meeting. So you have two men. There's a female leader. These two men want to have a camp meeting. They're on a board that drive the woman on that board that there must be a camp meeting, and they decide to go to another fellowship to provide financial assistance. So these two men drive this one to believe there needs to be a camp meeting. And so these two men go to another ministry for financial assistance for that camp meeting. So they go to one man, even though a woman was placed in leadership. So at this ministry, there's a female leader. But these two men go to this ministry to this man instead of the leader to seek financial assistance. And this one man goes to two other men here to seek their agreement for that project. And all of that is kept separate from the woman continental leader. So remember, what we're talking about is not wanting any movement intervention. We want to do our own thing. And this is how they're doing their own thing. This female leader, two men convince this one, the female leader, that we need to have a camp meeting. They go to another ministry, to a man, bypass the female leader for financial help. And this man goes to another two men. So we're not fighting against organizational battles. We're fighting battles of sexism. So The next story she talks about is 2 children in the movement having been raped. And I remember hearing her say that day. I was in shock that you even see that here. So 2 little children in this movement are raped. And the family in their heartache informed a board member of that movement. And that male board member takes 5 days to inform his board when he's forced to do so. And then they take 2 weeks to inform the continental leader. And then they write a report that is somehow devoid of the word rape. The organizational combat of this dispensation is not disconnected from the message. It's all revolving around sexism. The reason that there is a need for intervention is because 18 months ago, we were promised a change. Good versus evil was easy here. Elder Jeff just said, I don't want any part of it, and he left. And this dispensation is hard because so many people have said, we believe in change, they believe in equality, we accept it. We're with you, Tess. We'll stand by your side and fight this together. And what God says is they abandoned the form and not the spirit. Remember how paying homage was through nationalism, sexism, and homophobia. So they're still practicing sexism, so they have not abandoned the form. And it cannot and will not be tolerated inside this movement. Because in this history here, this was easy, good versus evil. Compromise is out of the question. You're going to fight hand-to-hand combat against sexism. When a woman leader is told her organizational letters are too cold by members of a sexist boys club, this is not an issue of organization, it's an issue of sexism. Something they should not say, something they would not say to a male leader. If they want a warm motherly figure, Catholicism is more than happy to provide that, because then you get one of those, one that's also pretty and a virgin, she's birthborn. I see more commenting on the chat, men, she's referring live at this time, she sees people commenting in the chat that she knows are failing equality when they call their female leaders cold and tell them they can just do whatever they want. The problem is that to maintain peace so that you stay in the movement, I'll no longer say that the end justifies the means. We will intervene. It's not foreign intervention. I do not represent Australia, but the message of equality was not that ministry leaders have the right to practice inequality without our intervention. As if the South had the freedom to practice slavery without the intervention of the executive government. And almost every organizational conflict in this movement comes down to the failure of the issues of nationalism and sexism. There was a woman in Arkansas who had a major issue with this movement. She said too many people haven't changed. And the principle of what she said was correct. She knew it and I knew it. If we could be united on the message, every part of it, all I'm asking is that instead of leaving, that we fight together. Women are not devoid of failing when it comes to equality. If you think a woman in your fellowship is committing adultery, I'm assuming this is another actual incident. If you think a woman in your fellowship is committing adultery, and you were wrong, by the way, and you start contacting your husband, then you are stepping between 2 women. You have Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Amy Coney Barrett, no matter your gender, no matter your race. If you're a woman, you're going to behave badly and attack other women. You will find yourself at odds with me too. This is the dispensation of organization. So there will be intervention. There was intervention in other ministries. The reason it's the dispensation of organization is because the message of equality came, and what God said is you will bring the message of equality into line with the organization of this movement. So if it seems like Parminder and I and your continental leaders are absent, it's because we're intervening in too many southern states where that organizational structure must be put in place, not to take people's freedoms, but to protect the people who are actually vulnerable. I never had the intention of doing this work alone. It needs people. I've been disappointed at some of the people I thought would fight by my side. And for whatever reason, often tiredness, they have not done so. It will get more intense. It always does at the formalization. The APHIS bull study was just the warning of that, but it must be insisted upon. So we know that she's talking about this formalization here, that it gets intense, and we are already past there. So I'll go ahead and close with this prayer, and then we'll have discussion. Dear God in heaven, we look back at the last 18 months and we see too much compromise for the sake of peace. We do not wish to needlessly damage souls, but we cannot excuse sexism and racism. We see it exhibited time after time. I hope that you will grant wisdom to the members of this movement, that they will turn their eyes inward, look to see where they have attacked their own ministry members with rebellion and sexism, and that many might straighten out these problems with empathy and love to do what is right regardless of consequences. You said this movement is success. May we not try to preserve that success by compromising on issues of equality. And I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.